So here's a little something that doesn't make it onto the list of the classical principles of animation, but which quite frankly, in my opinion, really should do. Let's call it the 13th principle, shall we? And what this is the idea of lead and follow. What is lead and follow? Well, quite simply, it's the idea that when things move, some part will tend to lead the action and other parts follow it. In a way, it's related again to follow through, overlap, anticipation, and so on. It's also kind of a technical principle in the same vein as overlap, follow through, squash and stretch, etc. Except that rather than attempting to give the idea of the emulation of physical laws and physical forces acting on things, it really has more to do with the force of motivation that is coming out of a character. It is that magical quantity which is the character's own thought process, or sometimes specifics of their anatomy that cause them to move in certain ways. For instance, have a look here at this facial animation. What you've got is this facial animation and this guy's moving his head around and, there you go. But look very carefully at his eyes. Notice that his eyes here are coming up slightly after the head at this point. He's continuing to look down as his head comes up. Here, his head is leading the action. He's still sort of got his mind's attention focused away off over here. He's thinking of something else. He knows he's coming across, but his attention and focus is elsewhere. His head is leading and his eyes are following. But as we go through the animation and his thought processes start to change, this switches. And now what do we see? His eyes start to dart first before his head. Now his eyes are leading and his head is following. Look at this little fellow here as he breaks out into this run. He throws himself over as he's turning round to run away. Look at what comes round first. His body is turning, but he's whipping his head over faster. If we see him from top view here, it's even clearer still. He's getting his head and looking ahead in the direction that he's going to be moving his body in. He is leading with his head. This is an overlapping action. Of course, what's happening is the head is getting to the point first, and the hip and the rest of the body is following after that, is overlapped afterwards. Lead and follow. We see here a walk from a standing start, and look at what's happening with the hip here specifically. You see, of course, that we have the good old anticipation move, but then the hip starts to move forward. In terms of his hips, he is essentially already walking before his foot actually starts to lift off the ground. This is almost an unbreakable rule when doing walk cycles from a standing start, is that you move the hip slightly before you start moving the feet. And the reason why? Bipeds lead their motion with their hips. That's just how they move. It's because they're basing their balance around their hips to keep themselves upright. That's the reason why you do it. Quadrupeds, as we see here, do a similar thing, but notice what's going on here. It's the chest that is moving off before the paws do. When quadrupeds move, walk, run, whatever, they lead with their chest. This is a very easy thing actually to understand for yourself if you want to try it. Make sure that you've got an empty space where you're not going to bump into anything or trip over. Close your eyes and just take a few steps around and try and observe how you're thinking, or at least how you're thinking in terms of your body. You very quickly become aware of the fact that you really are thinking with your hips, your legs and your feet. It is your lower body that is leading your action and just carrying your upper body around. All of it centered and pivoting around the hips area. Now try the exact same exercise, but get down on all fours and crawl about the space. Where are you thinking now? You should notice that you are really thinking in terms of your hands and your shoulders and your chest. Your legs and your hips, they're sort of playing catch up behind you. you're not really thinking about where you're trying to direct that part of your body. As such, identifying what part of a character is going to be leading and what part will be following a certain action is another key principle to employ to make sure that you are creating animation that is more believable and more natural for the character that you've got in play, either by virtue of their anatomy or, as we've seen in the examples of leading with the eyes, leading with the head, in terms of their thought process and what their intention and their motivation is. You can illustrate all of these things within an animation and within a motion by thinking about the parts that need to lead and those which need to follow.